The service rider explained transmissions to me for 6 full minutes without once stopping to breathe. He drew a little diagram on the back of my estimate, a box with an arrow, and he said the word fluid very slowly, the way you would say it to a child or a nervous dog, watching my face the whole time to see whether the big scary number had landed. $3,400. I let him finish. I have always believed in letting a man finish. What he did not know, because I was 28 and a woman, and had walked in that morning wearing leggings and a hoodie with a coffee stain on it, was that I had spent the last 5 years of my life teaching certified master technicians how to take apart the exact transmission he was lying to me about, put it back together blindfolded, and explain to a room of grown men why every part of it did what it did. I am a powertrain engineer. I will get to what that means and why it matters, but for now, all you need to know is that when Kyle, from the front counter, told me my transmission was leaking and my motor mounts were cracked and my brake pads were down to 2 millimeters and it all came to $3,400, he was talking to possibly the single worst customer in the state of Michigan he could have chosen to try it on. He just could not tell yet. So let me back all the way up, because the good part is not the number. The good part is what I did with a phone, a folder, and the state of Michigan. And the good part takes a while. Let me start with the car, because the car is the reason for all of it. I drive a Honda Civic that is older than some of the technicians who worked on it that day. It has 210,000 miles on the odometer, a small constellation of parking lot dents down the passenger side, and a driver's seat worn into the exact shape of me. It is not a nice car. People at my work, engineers who lease German sedans they cannot really afford, ask me every so often when I am going to get something that suits my salary. And I smile and change the subject, because they would not understand, and because the answer is never. That Civic was my father's. My dad, Sam, ran a one-bay independent garage on the east side of Grand Rapids for 31 years. A little cinder block building with a hand-painted sign and a waiting room that was really just 2 folding chairs and a coffee maker that had seen the fall of empires. He was the most honest man I have ever known, and I do not say that the way people say it at funerals. I mean, he was constitutionally, almost inconveniently honest. He would call a customer at home to tell them the repair they had authorized turned out not to be necessary, and refund the difference, and my mother would put her head in her hands, because that is not how you get rich running a garage. I grew up under that car, the Civic, on a creeper my dad cut down to kid size with a hacksaw. He bought it as a wreck when I was 9, and he and I rebuilt it together over 4 years of Saturdays. And it was the first engine I ever turned over with my own hands, kneeling on that cold concrete floor, while my dad said, "Listen, hear that? That little tick? That's the story it's telling you. Learn to hear the story." I learned to hear the story. That is, more or less, my entire career now. Listening to the story an engine tells, and writing it down in a language other people can use. My dad died when I was 22, the spring I finished my engineering degree, and he did not get to see me walk. He got the phone call that I had passed 3 weeks before, and he told everybody who came into the shop that his daughter was going to build the engines that other people only fixed. And then his heart quit on a Tuesday afternoon, between an alignment and a lunch he never ate. The Civic was in the will, if you can call one line on a legal pad a will. It said, "The Honda is Nora's. She knows why. I have driven it every day since. I will drive it until it, or I, stops, and I have told it so." There is one more piece of my growing up that you need, because it is the reason this whole story has a temperature to it. The reason it was never really about my $280. When I was 15, my mother took our tired old minivan to a quick lube place near her work because a warning light had come on and my dad's shop was slammed that week and she did not want to bother him with it. She came home an hour later, $340 lighter, holding a receipt for a part I could tell you now she never needed. And she was not angry. That was the thing that stuck with me. She was ashamed. I remember her at the kitchen table that night, turning the receipt over and over in her hands. She was not crying about the money, though $340 was real money in our house, and I knew it. She was crying because a man half her age had used a fistful of words she did not have, and watched her not have them, and built the whole sale on exactly that. And she felt, she said, so stupid. My mother was not stupid. My mother kept the books for the shop and could stretch $1 until it hollered. But there is a specific cruelty in being made to feel dumb about a machine, and she had just felt it, and it had gotten all the way inside her. My dad did not yell. He read the receipt once, and his jaw did a thing I saw maybe 5 times in my whole life, and the next morning, on his one slow day, he drove over there himself. He walked in wearing his own shop shirt with his name stitched on it, and he asked a few quiet questions in the language they had been counting on my mother not to speak. They refunded most of it before he got to the 3rd question. He never told my mother he went. I only know because I was in the passenger seat. And on the ride home, he gave me the only real sermon of my childhood. He said, "They don't rob you with a gun anymore, baby. They rob you with a word you don't know. So learn the words." So I learned the words. I learned all of them. I got a whole degree in the words, and then I spent 5 years teaching them to other people. And I told myself the entire time that it was about engines. And most of it was, but some of it, the part that sat up cold and clear and wide awake in that cornerstone waiting room, was a 15-year-old at a kitchen table, watching her mother be made small. Deciding, without knowing she was deciding it, that she would never once be that person. And that if she had anything to say about it, neither would the person sitting in the next chair. So that is the car Kyle looked at in the parking lot that morning, and decided was driven by somebody who would not know a motor mount from a muffin. Fair enough, it is a humble little car. But you should be careful in this life about the stories you tell yourself based on a coffee stain and a pair of leggings. Here is what I actually do for a living, kept simple. I spent the first 5 years out of school working for a company that supplies parts and training to dealerships and repair shops across the Midwest. My specific job for those 5 years was powertrain, which means the engine and the transmission and everything that turns fuel into motion. I did not just design on a computer. I stood at a bench in front of rooms full of working technicians, some of them 30 years older than me, and I taught them how these systems failed, how to diagnose them, how to know the difference between a part that is worn and a part that is fine. I have personally trained, at a rough count, over 400 technicians. I know what a real transmission leak looks like because I have shown 400 men where to find one. I will give you one picture of that work, so it is not just a line on a resume. Early on, my 2nd year maybe, I got sent to run a teardown class at a dealership a couple hours north, and the room was all men, most of them a good deal older than me, and there was one in the front row, a big guy in his 50s, with 30 years in the trade, and a daughter about my age, who folded his arms when I walked in and did not unfold them. You can watch him do the math and decide I was going to waste his afternoon. So I did not argue with him, because you never win that argument with words. I just set a failed transmission on the bench, the exact unit those men saw come through every week. And I took it down to its bones and walked the room through why it had died, the specific wear pattern, the small, ugly thing that 3 previous shops had missed. Somewhere in there, the big guy leaned in without meaning to, and his arms came unfolded. By the end, he was asking real questions, the good kind. And on his way out, he stopped and said gruff, "Where were you 15 years ago?" And that was the entire apology, and it was more than enough. I tell you this not to be impressive. I tell you because that folded arms math, that decision a man makes about what a young woman could possibly know before she has said one word, is the identical feeling that walked Kyle across a waiting room to my chair. I had spent 5 years turning that feeling around in rooms full of hardened professionals. Kyle, bless him, was an amateur at it. And that is the whole hinge of the story. When Kyle sat down next to me in that waiting room with his printout, he was not lying to a scared young woman. He was lying to a person who had, quite literally, written the training module on the component he was lying about. He just could not see it, because he had already decided who I was the second I walked in. The morning started as ordinary as mornings get. My oil light had come on, and I was between work trips, and my dad's old shop was long closed, and I did not yet have a regular place in that part of town. So I did the lazy thing everybody does. I pulled into a Cornerstone Auto Care, one of those clean, bright chain shops with the bay doors and the television bolted to the corner of the waiting room and the smell of burnt coffee and rubber. $39 for an oil change, said the sign. In and out, back at my desk by noon. That was the plan. I handed my keys to Kyle at the counter. He was maybe 24, gelled hair, a polo shirt with the Cornerstone logo, a lanyard, and the specific confidence of a young man who has just been to a weekend sales training and learned the phrase, courtesy inspection. I said, "Just the oil, please." He smiled and said they always did a complimentary multi-point inspection, no charge, just to keep me safe out there. And I said, "Sure, fine," because I had nothing to hide under that car. I knew every inch of it. I had changed those brake pads myself in my apartment parking lot 4 months earlier. That is the detail I want you to hold on to. 4 months earlier, I had personally installed brand new brake pads, front and rear, with roughly 11 millimeters of material on them. I know it was 11 because I measured them with my own calipers, because that is the kind of person I am. So I sat in the waiting room with my laptop, half working, half watching a cooking show on the bolted-down television, and I waited for a $39 oil change, and I felt nothing coming, because there was no reason to. Kyle came back after about 40 minutes with a clipboard and a face arranged into deep professional concern. He sat down in the chair beside me, angled toward me, close, and he set the clipboard on his knee where I could not quite see it, and he said, "So, Nora, I've got to be straight with you. We found some stuff." And there was a little thrill under his concern, a hunter's stillness. And I recognized it, because I had spent 5 years teaching people how not to be that guy. And here he was, the living cautionary tale, sitting down next to me with the printout. He walked me through it slowly. He used my first name a lot, the way they teach you in the seminar. He said my motor mounts were cracked, both of them, and that if one let go on the highway, the engine could shift and I could lose control. And he let that sit. He said there was fluid weeping from my transmission, and that once they start to weep, they go fast, and that I did not want to be stranded, a woman alone, on the side of the road. He actually said that. A woman alone. He said my brake pads were down to 2 millimeters, which was, and I am quoting him, basically metal on metal. A safety issue. He really couldn't, in good conscience, let me drive out of here like that. Then he turned the clipboard around, and there was the number, printed in a bold font at the bottom of a long, itemized list. $3,400 and change. Parts and labor. He had a pen ready. He said, "Now I can get you financing. We work with a company. It's real easy. And I can probably have you out of here by 5 if you say the word." And he clicked the pen. That little click. He clicked it, and he looked at me, with all that manufactured worry, and he waited for me to be afraid. I want to describe the exact feeling, because it was not anger, not yet. It was a very old, very cold clarity, the kind I inherited from my father, along with the car. It was the feeling of standing in front of a system that is telling you a lie, and knowing, all the way to the ground, that it is a lie, and choosing, in that first moment, to say nothing at all. My dad used to call it hearing the story. Kyle was telling me a story, and it was a bad one, full of holes, and I could hear every single one. Because here is the thing. Motor mounts do crack. Transmissions do leak. Brake pads do wear. Every single item on Kyle's list was a real thing that really happens to real cars. Which is exactly why the scam works. Because it is not made of impossible things. It is made of true things, aimed at someone who cannot tell whether they are true this time. But I had installed those brake pads 16 weeks earlier with 11 millimeters of material. Pads do not lose 9 millimeters in 16 weeks, unless you are braking with the parking brake on down a mountain every day. It was not possible. It was not even close to possible, which meant every other item on that clipboard had just lost its credibility too. So I did not argue. Arguing is what they want, because arguing is emotional, and emotion is where they beat you. Instead, I smiled, a little helplessly, and I made my voice go soft and uncertain. And I said, "Oh gosh, that's a lot. I don't really know about cars." Kyle relaxed about an inch. I watched him do it. He thought the fish was on the line. And I said, "Would it be okay if I actually saw the stuff? Like, could you show me? I'm such a visual person." And I gave him a small, dumb, apologetic smile. And inside, I turned as still and cold as the concrete floor of my father's shop. Because I had just decided something. I was not going to make a scene. I was not going to lecture Kyle in that waiting room about torque specs and prove how smart I was, and give him the satisfaction of a crazy lady to describe to the other guys at lunch. No. I was going to do the thing my dad taught me, and the thing my whole career had taught me, which is worth more than being right out loud. I was going to document everything. I was going to be quiet and polite and thorough, and I was going to build a folder that could not be argued with. And then I was going to hand that folder to people whose entire job was to care about it. I just did not know yet how big that folder was going to get. Kyle hesitated at the idea of me coming back to the bay. They always say it is an insurance thing. Customers are not allowed in the shop area, liability. And that is sometimes true and very often convenient. But he wanted the sale. And a nervous girl who wants to see the scary broken parts is a girl talking herself into the financing. So he decided it worked in his favor. He said he would do me a favor and walk me back, just this once, and to stay close to him. I said, "Thank you so much." I got out my phone. I said, "Do you mind if I take some pictures so I can show my roommate? She knows more about this stuff than me." Another lie. I do not have a roommate. But it explained the phone, and Kyle, generous in victory, said of course. So I started filming. Not a photo. Video. The whole walk around. Narrating softly. The date and the time. The name of the shop visible on a sign as we passed. Kyle's voice on the recording, explaining each thing to me in his slow, seminar voice. Michigan, I happen to know, is a one-party consent state, which means I am legally allowed to record a conversation I am part of without telling the other person. And I was very much a part of this conversation. I did not hide the phone, I just held it, like a girl filming broken car parts for her fictional roommate. And Kyle performed for it beautifully, because he had no idea he was being deposed. My car was up on the lift in the third bay, and this is where Kyle made his first real mistake. The kind you cannot take back, though neither of us knew it yet. He walked me under my own car, and he pointed up at the transmission, and he said, "See that, right there? See how it's all wet and dirty? That's your leak." And I looked up at my transmission, the transmission I have looked at 100 times. And it was damp and grimy, sure, the way the underside of a car with 210,000 miles is damp and grimy everywhere. There was no leak. There was road grime, and a little old seep from a valve cover up top that had been there for years and had nothing to do with the transmission and was not going anywhere. But an ordinary person, standing under a car for the first time in their life, looks up at all that dark, oily complexity and sees exactly what the nice man tells them to see. That is the whole trick. The car is guilty because you cannot read it. I want to stop here and say the true thing about this kind of scam, because it is not really about cars, and understanding that is the whole key. A repair scam does not target stupid people. It targets people who cannot, in that specific moment, read the specific language, and then it makes them feel that the gap in their knowledge is a gap in their intelligence. Those are not the same thing, and the whole business depends on you confusing them. A brilliant surgeon can be helpless under a lift. A woman who runs a company can sit in that chair with her stomach in a knot. It is not about smart, it is about who holds the words. And in that room, for those few minutes, they hold all of them. And they know it. And they price it. And they aim it, deliberately, at the people least able to fight back. The old, the young, the tired, the ones who came in alone. Kyle looked at me and saw a young woman in leggings and did the arithmetic. And his arithmetic was not wrong about most people who look like me on a Tuesday. And that is exactly what made it so ugly, that it usually works. I was not smarter than the 91 people who paid. I want to be very clear about that, because I think it matters more than anything else in this story. I was not smarter than Ruth, or than the proud old man we will get to. I just happened to hold this one particular set of words by the pure accident of who my father was. The scam did not fail because it met a genius. It failed because it met the one customer in 1,000 who had been handed the language for free, kneeling on a cold concrete floor, at the age of 9. Then he showed me the brakes, and here my heart actually did pick up, because this was the one I could disprove with a ruler. He pointed at the front rotor and said the pads were nearly gone, and I looked, and I could see, with my own trained eyes from 6 feet away, that the pads had at least 8 or 9 millimeters of material left on them, which is most of a brand new pad, which is exactly what you would expect from pads installed 16 weeks ago. He was pointing at healthy brakes and calling them a safety emergency. And I said, softly, "Oh no." And I zoomed my camera in on those pads and held it there, nice and steady, and got a clear, close, well-lit, time-stamped video of the actual condition of my actual brakes, straight from the horse's mouth, in the horse's own building. If you have ever wondered what evidence looks like, it looks like a bored young man pointing at the thing that proves him a liar. But the motor mounts and the brakes and the imaginary leak, those were just the appetizer. Because then Kyle said the sentence that turned this from a bad afternoon into the thing that is now, apparently, a story people tell. He said, and we've got it all on video for you, the whole inspection. Our techs record everything. It's all in the system. Super transparent. Want me to pull it up? And he was proud of it. That was the thing. He offered it as proof of how honest they were. He walked me back to the counter, tapping at his tablet, pleased with himself, ready to show me the smoking gun that would push me over the edge into signing. And he turned the tablet around, and he played me a video, narrated by a different technician's voice, of a transmission actively leaking fluid. A real drip. A bad one. Fluid running down and hanging in a red bead. And Kyle tapped the screen and said, "See? That's yours. That's happening right now under your car." And I looked at that video, and I went very, very still. Because it was not my car. I knew it in less than 2 seconds, and I knew it the way you know your own mother's handwriting. The undercarriage in the video was clean, freshly cleaned. The kind of clean a car gets at a dealership, not the salted, rusted, 200,000-mile underbody of a Michigan Civic that has seen 14 winters. The exhaust routing was wrong. The transmission in the video was not even the same transmission that is in my car. It was a different model entirely. I had just 30 seconds earlier stood under my actual car and seen my actual transmission with my own eyes, and this was not it. This video, this proof, this thing they showed to push frightened people into $3,400 of financing, was a stock clip of some completely different vehicle, wearing my name. I kept my face soft. I said, "Wow, that looks really bad." And inside, my whole chest had gone quiet and electric at the same time, because I understood, in that one instant, that I was not looking at one dishonest kid trying to pad a Tuesday. I was looking at a system. Somebody had made that video. Somebody had loaded it into the tablet. Somebody had trained Kyle to turn it around and say, "That's yours." This was not Kyle freelancing. This was built. And if it was built, then it was not just being played for me. It was being played, that clean red drip of somebody else's fluid, for every scared retiree and single mother and teenager who rolled in for a $39 oil change and could not read the story their car was telling. I stood at that counter with my phone in my hand, and I thought, in my father's voice, plain as the concrete floor, "Oh, this is much bigger than my brakes." I did not sign. I put on my most apologetic face, and I told Kyle that $3,400 was just more than I could do that day, that I would have to talk to my dad about it, which was the first true thing I had said in 20 minutes, even if my dad had been gone 6 years. Kyle's whole posture changed. The concern evaporated. He got a little clipped, a little cold, and he warned me again about driving on those brakes. And I said I understood, and I asked him for two things, sweetly, like they were nothing. I asked him to print me the full written estimate, itemized, so I could show my dad the specifics. And I asked him to email me a copy of that inspection video, since it was so transparent and all, so my dad could see it too. Kyle, still hoping I would come back and finance it once my imaginary father blessed the deal, did both. He printed the estimate on cornerstone letterhead, itemized, with the recommended repairs and the $3,400 total, and he signed it, and he emailed me the video. He handed me, with his own hands, a signed document recommending thousands of dollars of unnecessary repairs and a copy of a fraudulent video attached to my name. If you are ever building a case, this is the dream. The other side does your filing for you. While Kyle was at the printer, I sat back down in the waiting room, and that is where I met Ruth. Ruth was somewhere in her late 70s, small, in a lavender cardigan, with her purse held in her lap with both hands, the way my grandmother used to hold hers. She had come in for a coupon oil change, the same as me, and while I had been in the back, a different service writer had done to her exactly what Kyle had done to me. And now Ruth was sitting there with her own clipboard and her own big number, and her hands were shaking. Her number was $2,900. Struts, she told me, and a battery, and something about a filter, and she did not understand most of it. But the young man had been so nice, and he said it was not safe, and she lived alone, and she just did not know. And could I, she asked me, a total stranger, did I know anything about cars? I sat down next to Ruth, and I did for her what I wish somebody had been sitting there to do for every person this had ever happened to. I did not scare her more. I said, Ruth, I actually do know a little about cars, and I would love to look at your list with you. And I went through it with her, quietly, item by item, and I asked her simple questions. When was the last time the car did anything strange? Never, she said. It drives just fine. Any noises? Any warning lights? Any leaks on the driveway? No, dear, nothing. And I said, Ruth, a car that drives just fine and shows you nothing is usually a car that is fine. And there is no law that says you have to decide today, in this chair, while a stranger holds a pen. Why don't we get your keys and you go home, and you take your granddaughter's husband, or a neighbor, or me, honestly, to a second shop, and you let somebody with no reason to lie to you look at it first. You would not believe how those few sentences landed on Ruth's face. It was like watching someone come up out of cold water. Because nobody had told her she was allowed to say, not today. That is the quietest, cruelest part of the whole thing. These places do not just sell you repairs. They sell you the feeling that the decision is happening right now, and you are trapped inside it. And all it takes to break the spell is one person in the next chair saying, out loud, you can stand up and walk out, and nothing bad will happen. Ruth stood up and walked out with her keys and her $2,900 still in her pocket. And she squeezed my hand at the door. And I have thought about her roughly once a week ever since. Then I drove my car, my perfectly healthy car, straight across town to the one place I should have gone in the first place. There is a man named Gil who worked alongside my father for years before opening his own two-bay shop. And Gil is the closest thing to my dad still turning wrenches in Grand Rapids. He is somewhere past 60, with forearms like bridge cable and a way of going quiet and listening to an engine with his head tipped that is so exactly my father that the first time I visited him after the funeral, I had to sit in my car for a while first. I called Gil from the Cornerstone parking lot and I said, "I need a favor, and I need it in writing." And Gil said, "Well, come on then." Gil put my car up on his lift and went over every single item on Kyle's list while I filmed that too, with Gil's blessing, narrating for the record. The motor mounts were solid, no cracks, no play. He grabbed and shook and showed me. The transmission was dry, the little valve cover seep up top, exactly what I had said it was. Nothing to do with the transmission, decades from being a problem. And the brakes. Gil measured my brake pads with a proper gauge, on camera, and read the number out loud. A hair over 9 millimeters, front and rear. Basically new. Then Gil wrote it all up on his shop letterhead, signed and dated, a professional second opinion, stating that the vehicle required none of the recommended repairs and that the brake pads measured over 9 millimeters, and he would not let me pay him for it. He said, "Your dad would come back and haunt my lift if I charged you for this. Buy me a coffee sometime and tell them who taught you." I sat in Gil's little waiting room while he printed the letter. 2 folding chairs and a coffee maker that could have been the identical twin of my father's, down to the brown ring baked into the warmer. And Gil told me a story I had never heard. He told me about a winter a long time ago, when my dad drove 40 minutes in an ice storm to bring a stranded customer a loaner car, so she would not miss driving her own mother to a surgery, and charged her not one dime, and never mentioned it to a soul. Gil only heard about it years later, from the woman herself. "That is who trained the state of Michigan's newest headache," Gil said, and he handed me the signed letter, and he was grinning. But his eyes had gone bright and wet, and so had mine, and neither of us said a single word about it. Because that is exactly how my father's people handle a thing like that. You let it sit in the room. You do not poke it. Then, you go back to talking about brake pads. I folded his letter into my folder, squared the corners, and I drove my healthy little car home the long way, past the empty lot where my dad's cinder block shop used to stand before they put a drugstore on it. And I told him, out loud, in the car, that I was going to finish this. I do that sometimes. I have decided it is allowed. So now I had a folder. I want you to picture the folder, because the folder is the hero of this story, not me. In it, I had a signed Cornerstone estimate for $3,400 of unnecessary repairs. I had a video of Kyle personally walking me under my own car and misrepresenting its condition, with the shop name and the date on it. I had a close, clear video of my actual brake pads. I had the emailed inspection video showing a transmission that was demonstrably not mine, not even the same model. And I had a signed, dated second opinion from a licensed independent mechanic proving every item false. That is not a he said, she said. That is a case. But I was not done, because I am my father's daughter, and my father did nothing halfway, and there was one more piece I wanted. The piece you cannot argue with because you can hold it in your hand. Here is a thing most people do not know, and it is the law in Michigan and in a lot of states, so learn it. When a shop replaces a part on your car, you have the right to get the old part back, as long as you ask for it at the time you authorize the repair. It exists precisely because of shops like this one. So a few days later, I went back to Cornerstone, and I told Kyle that my dad had said to go ahead and do just the motor mounts, the cheapest item on the list. We would save up for the rest. Kyle lit right back up, and when I signed the authorization for that one repair, I wrote on it, in the customer notes, in pen, "Please return all replaced parts to customer." and I made Kyle initial it. It cost me $280 to replace a motor mount that did not need replacing. I have never spent money more happily in my life. I will admit I did not enjoy that hour in the waiting room. It is one thing to be certain a repair is unnecessary, and another thing entirely to hand a shop that has already lied to you, your keys, and your permission to go under your car with tools in their hands. I sat there and drank their burnt coffee and watched the clock and told myself, over and over, that a motor mount is a simple bolt-on job. That there was nothing back there for a dishonest hand to quietly make worse. That the part they were removing was worth more to me in a plastic bag than it had ever been on the car. It was still the longest hour of the whole affair. My dad used to say, the most expensive thing in any garage is trust. And here I had walked in and spent $280 of it on purpose to buy something no amount of my own word could ever equal. Because an hour later, Kyle handed me a plastic bag, and in the plastic bag was my old motor mount, the one they had documented in writing as cracked and a highway safety emergency. And it was perfect. Not a crack in it. Solid rubber, solid steel, years of life left in it. I now owned the physical, tangible, holdable proof that Cornerstone Auto Care had charged me to remove a functioning part they had certified in writing as dangerous. I put it on my kitchen table next to the folder, and I looked at it for a while. And I did not feel angry anymore. I felt calm. I felt like a person standing at a bench with all the parts laid out in order, about to explain to a room exactly how the thing works. Then I filed. And I filed the way I do everything, which is thoroughly and in the correct order. Michigan, it turns out, is one of the states that actually regulates this. Auto repair facilities have to be registered with the state, and the mechanics have to be certified in the categories they work in. And there is a whole office, the Bureau of Automotive Regulation, whose entire job is to take complaints exactly like mine. There are real rules. A shop has to give you a written estimate before they do the work. They cannot exceed that estimate by more than 10% without calling you. And they cannot, it will not surprise you to learn, recommend and charge for repairs that are not necessary. Every one of those rules had my folder in mind, so I wrote it up. I filed a detailed complaint with the Bureau of Automotive Regulation, with the whole folder attached, organized, labeled, time-stamped, the way I would submit anything at work. And then I filed a second complaint with the Consumer Protection Division of the Michigan Attorney General's office, because the doctored inspection video was not just sloppy, it was fraud, and it clearly was not made for me alone. I wrote, in my complaint, one sentence I chose very carefully. I wrote, I am a powertrain engineer with 5 years of experience training certified technicians, and I am telling you that the video attached to my file depicts a different vehicle, and I do not believe it was created for me specifically. I wanted that sentence read by someone who would understand exactly what it meant. And then for a while, nothing happened. And that was the hard part. Because justice, through the correct channels, is not a movie. It is a lot of waiting by a phone that does not ring. I will be honest with you about the low stretch, because it was real. Cornerstone Corporate sent me a form email that called my experience a valued opportunity to improve, and offered me a coupon for a free oil change, which is a special kind of insult. A coupon to come back and get robbed again. When I called the store, a manager named Dennis got on the line. And Dennis was not nice the way Kyle had been fake nice. Dennis was tired and dismissive. And he told me, our technicians are certified, and I would need to take it up with corporate. And when I mentioned the video did not match my car, he said, flatly, "Ma'am, you're mistaken," and hung up on me. That night was the only night I wobbled. I sat at my table with my folder and my perfect motor mount, and I thought, they do this every single day. And they have a corporate email and a manager who hangs up on people. And I am one girl with a Honda. And maybe nothing happens. Maybe this is just how it is. And the smart move is to eat my $280 and get on with my life. My dad would have understood the temptation. And then I thought about Ruth's hands shaking in that lavender cardigan. And I thought about the 90 other Ruths who did not have a stranger in the next chair. And I put the folder back in order and I went to bed. Because giving up was no longer a thing I was going to be able to live with. I want to be honest that the low stretch was not one bad night. It was weeks of them. Weeks of a quiet phone and a form email and the slow creeping suspicion that being right does not automatically mean being answered. That is the part nobody shows you about doing things the correct way. The correct way is slow, and it does not care about your feelings, and it asks you to keep believing in a process that gives you nothing back for a long time. So I kept the folder on the kitchen table where I would have to see it every single morning over my coffee, right next to the perfect motor mount, so that quitting would have to be a decision I made on purpose, in daylight, looking straight at both of them. I never quite could. 6 weeks later, my phone rang, and it was a woman named Cheryl Owens, an investigator with the Bureau of Automotive Regulation. And she had read my complaint, all of it, and she wanted to talk. I want to tell you what an actual investigation feels like from the inside, because it is nothing like television, and it is somehow more satisfying for that. There was no shouting, no confrontation, no scene. There was a calm, meticulous woman named Cheryl, who asked me precise questions and understood every one of my answers, and who, when I mentioned the inspection video, went very quiet in the way that professionals go quiet when a case just got bigger. Because here is the thing that turned my little complaint into something with weight. The state had already received other complaints about that location. Mine was not the first. Mine was just the first one that arrived with a folder. And that is the difference a folder makes. The other complaints were true, every one of them. But they were people saying, "I feel like I got ripped off," which is a feeling, and feelings are hard to act on. I had arrived with a signed estimate, 2 independent videos, a professional second opinion on letterhead, a fraudulent video depicting the wrong vehicle, and a functioning part they had certified as dangerous, sitting in a labeled bag with the date on it. I had turned other people's vague feelings of being wronged into a case because I could read the story, and I had written it down where someone with authority could act on it. Cheryl asked me if I would be willing to provide the physical motor mount and testify to its condition. I said I had been hoping she would ask. Cheryl told me later, when it was all over, that the physical motor mount was the thing that changed the weather on the case. A complaint is one person's word. A signed estimate is better. A video is better still. But a functioning part, sitting in an evidence bag that a company had certified in writing as a cracked safety hazard and charged a customer to remove, is a fact you can set on a table in front of anyone. And it does not blink, and it does not get flustered on cross-examination. She said most people never think to ask for the old part. She said she wished more did. I told her I was going to spend the rest of my life telling people to, and I have kept that promise, and we will get to that. The other thing the investigation did was give faces to the number, and one of those faces has stayed with me. Through my online post, before I even knew Cheryl's name, a woman named Denise had written to me privately. Her father was 81, a Navy veteran, still sharp about most things, but slipping in the ways that quietly break your heart. And he had taken his truck in for a bad wiper and come home with a $4,000 repair and a proud look on his face, because the nice young man had told him he was being responsible. Denise found the invoice weeks later in a drawer. By the time she and I talked, she had spent a month furious at herself for not watching his mail more closely, which is its own kind of theft, the guilt these places hand the family for free. I walked Denise through all of it, the same way I had walked Ruth through it in that waiting room. And I told her about the parts return law and the complaint office and the questions to ask. And her father's $4,000 ended up on the list of things the company was made to put right. And it came back to him. But what I remember is the last thing Denise said to me on the phone. She said, "I keep thinking about how many of them there are. The old men who came home proud." And she was right. That is the quietest damage these places do. They do not just take the money. They take a careful person's belief that they can still be trusted to handle their own affairs. And they hand it back to the family as shame. There were more like Denise once the state started calling people. Most of them had no idea they had been part of anything larger. They had just carried a small private conviction that they had been cheated, with no way to prove it, and had folded it up and put it in a drawer the way you do with a thing you are sure you cannot win. What the investigation did, more than any fine, more than any citation, was walk down that long row of drawers and open them, one at a time, and tell each person, "You were not imagining it, and here is your money back." I have come to believe that is the most underrated thing a working system does. It is not the punishment. It is the letter that says, out loud, from an authority, "You were right. You were not crazy. It happened." The investigation took months, and I was not the center of it, and that was the point. Once the state pulled the thread, the whole sweater came apart on its own. The inspection video, the one Kyle had shown me as proof, turned out to be one of a small library of stock clips that had been loaded onto the shop tablets and passed off, across more than one location, as footage of individual customers' cars. Somebody, somewhere above the level of Kyle and even Dennis, had decided that a scary video sold repairs, and it did not much matter whose car was in it. That is the part that took it out of the realm of one shady store and into the realm of the Attorney General's office. Because a made-up sales pitch is ugly, but a fabricated video attached to a specific person's invoice is fraud with a capital everything. I never learned the name of the person who built those videos, and I have made a kind of peace with that. Somewhere above the stores, there was a person, or a small, quiet room of people, who had looked at a spreadsheet and decided that a scary clip of a leaking transmission raised the average repair ticket by some number of dollars, and that the clip did not actually need to be the customer's real car for the number to work, and had assembled a little library of fear and shipped it out to the tablets. That person never met Ruth. That is the thing about the modern version of this old crime. The hand that builds the lie never has to watch it land on an 81-year-old sailor's proud face. The distance is not an accident. The distance is the whole design, because it lets every single person in the chain feel like they only did a small part. Kyle only read the script. Dennis only ran the store. Someone upstairs only made a video. And a retired veteran only came home $4,000 poorer, feeling like he had done something responsible. I need to say something here about Kyle, because this is the part where a lot of stories go wrong, and I do not want this one to. It would be easy to make Kyle the villain and enjoy his downfall. But I sat in front of enough rooms of technicians in 5 years to know exactly what Kyle was. Kyle was 24 and underpaid and working on commission, and somebody had sat him in a room and taught him the script and the video and the slow voice and the word financing, and told him this was just how you hit your numbers. And Kyle had decided he needed the job more than he needed to ask where the video came from. That does not make it right. He looked a frightened old woman in the eye and lied to her for money. And there is a line there he chose to cross. But the person I wanted the state to reach was never really Kyle. It was the person who made the video and handed it down. Kyle was the last link in a chain, and I did not need him on his knees. I needed the chain cut. And it was. I will give you the ending in the plain, unglamorous, deeply satisfying way it actually arrived, which was mostly by mail and email over the following year. Because that is what real justice looks like. It looks like paperwork. The Bureau of Automotive Regulation cited the facility. There were fines, and there was a corrective action order. And the location's registration went under a probationary status that meant the state would be watching everything they did for a good long while. The Attorney General's Consumer Protection Division, once the fabricated video piece was in front of them, did the thing that actually matters, which is that they did not settle it for just me. As part of resolving the matter, Cornerstone was required to go back through its records and identify customers who had been sold repairs off the back of those doctored inspection videos, and make it right. The number I eventually heard, and I have no reason to doubt it, was 91 people. 91 refunds. 91 folks who got a letter and a check for work they never should have paid for. Most of whom, I promise you, had spent a year assuming they had simply been unlucky. I got one letter, months into the refunds, that I keep in the folder to this day. It was from a woman I never met, forwarded to me by Cheryl's office with the sender's permission, and it was 3 sentences long. It said she had gotten a check she did not expect, for a repair she had always privately suspected was a lie, and that she had felt a little bit crazy about it for 2 years, and that she wanted whoever started this to know she did not feel crazy anymore. She did not sign a full name. She did not need to. I have read a great many important documents in my career, torque specifications and failure analyses and patents, and not one of them ever landed on me like those 3 plain sentences from a stranger who finally got to stop feeling crazy. People ask me sometimes whether I was frightened to take on a company, whether there were threats, whether it got ugly. And the honest answer is no. And that is the part I most want people to hear. Because the fear of ugliness is exactly what keeps most folks from ever filing. Nothing ugly happened to me. A corporation does not come to your house. What happens is that you fill out a careful form, and you attach your folder, and you wait. And eventually, a calm professional named Cheryl calls you back and does her job. The system is not brave, and it is not a hero out of a movie. It is a filing cabinet with rules. But if you feed it the truth, in order, with the pages labeled, it will grind forward on its own slow schedule. And it will get there. And you do not have to be brave to use it. You just have to be organized. And you have to not quit before it wakes up. The videos came down. All of them, across every location that had been using that library. That is the piece I am proudest of, quietly, when I think about it. Because Ruth is out there. And so are all the people who will roll in next year for a coupon oil change. and not one of them will ever be shown a clean red drip of somebody else's transmission fluid and told that it is theirs. You cannot measure a thing that does not happen. But it does not happen now to a lot of people. Because one Tuesday, a service writer picked the wrong girl in leggings. Kyle, last I heard, does not work in the car business anymore. I did not ask for that, and I take no pleasure in it. And I hope, wherever he landed, nobody ever hands him a script again. Dennis, the manager who hung up on me, had to sit across a table from a state investigator and explain a fabricated video. And I confess, I do not lie awake feeling sorry about that one. And my motor mount, my perfect $280 motor mount, came back to me after it had done its work as evidence. And it sits on the shelf in my apartment right now, next to a photo of my dad in front of his old cinder block shop. The two of them keeping each other company. Now let me tell you what happened next, because with a story like this, the next part is the whole reason I am telling it at all. I made one mistake in the middle of everything, if you want to call it that. When I filed my complaints, I had also, in my frustration, written up what happened in a long, careful, unglamorous post in a local online group. Not a rant, just here's exactly what they did, and here's exactly what I did about it, and here's the law, and here's how you get your old parts back, and here is the office you file with. I did not expect anything from it. I expected it to sink, like everything sinks. It did not sink. It went, in the small way that useful things sometimes go, everywhere. And my phone started ringing, and it has not really stopped since. And the callers are almost all women. And a lot of them are older, and they all say some version of the same thing. They say, I think this is happening to me right now. I am sitting in the parking lot. They want $2,000. Can you just tell me if it is real? And here is what I do. I stay on the phone with them. I ask them the Ruth questions. Does the car do anything strange? Any lights? Any noises? Any leaks? And when the answer is no, nothing, it drives just fine, I tell them the sentence that broke the spell for Ruth. You do not have to decide today, in that chair, while a stranger holds a pen. Get your keys. Go home. Take it to somebody with no reason to lie to you. It got to be enough calls that I did the obvious thing. Once a month, on a Saturday morning, I rent the back room of a library, the same library where I go for the quiet, and I teach a free 2-hour class that I call, with no imagination whatsoever, How to Not Get Ripped Off at the Mechanic. It is mostly women. It is a lot of widows and a lot of college kids, and every so often a nervous young guy who is too embarrassed to admit at the shop that he does not know either. I teach them the 3 questions. I teach them their rights, the written estimate, the 10% rule, the old parts you are allowed to keep. I teach them that a car that drives fine and shows you nothing is usually fine. I do not teach them to become engineers. I teach them to not be afraid, because fear is the only thing those places are actually selling. And it turns out, fear has a very short shelf life once somebody shows you how to read the label. I will give you one Saturday, because it is the one I think about most. A young woman came in and sat near the back, a labor and delivery nurse coming straight off a night shift, still in her scrubs, and she did not say a word the whole first hour. At the break, she came up and told me, quietly, that she had almost financed $2,600 of repairs the week before, that she had actually been holding the pen, and that something made her set it down and walk out and look up my class instead. She said, "I work 12-hour shifts keeping people alive, and I still felt too dumb to say no in that chair." And I told her exactly what I am telling you. It is not dumb. It was built by professionals to work on smart, tired people. You are precisely who it is designed for. That is not a flaw in you. That is the entire business model. There was a man, too, one of the few, a retired machinist in his 70s, who came to 3 classes before he admitted why. His late wife had always handled the cars, he said, the way some couples split up the world between them. And after she passed, he had been taken twice inside a single year because he did not know how to ask the right questions and was too proud to look like he did not know. He said the second time cost him nearly $1,000, and he had not told his kids because he did not want them to start thinking he could not manage on his own. Learning the 3 questions, he told me, was not really about the money. It was about not having to move in with his daughter 1 year sooner than he had to. I think about that a great deal. What a handful of car repair questions was actually buying that man was time in his own house. And here is the part that still gets me. About 6 months into the classes, an older woman started showing up. Not to learn, but to help. Sitting near the newcomers, patting hands, saying the sentence for me before I could get to it. You do not have to decide today. It was Ruth, lavender cardigan and all. She had kept my name from that waiting room, tracked down the class, and appointed herself, without asking a soul, my permanent assistant. She tells every nervous person who comes through the door the same thing. She says, "Honey, this young lady sat next to me on the worst morning of my year and told me I could stand up and walk right out. And I did, and I kept my money and my dignity both. And now I come here to pass it down the row." Pass it down the row. That is the whole thing, right there in a lavender cardigan. I still drive the Civic. 220,000 miles on it now and climbing. The same worn seat, the same little constellation of dents. Gil keeps an eye on it for me and refuses still to let me pay full price. And every time I am under it on a creeper, I hear my dad. Listen, hear that? That little tick? That's the story it's telling you. Learn to hear the story. I learned to hear the story, Dad. And then I learned the best part. The part I do not think even he knew, which is that once you can hear it, you do not get to keep it to yourself. You owe it to every person sitting in a waiting room with shaking hands who never got taught the language. You read it to them, out loud, and you watch them come up out of the cold water, and you hand them their keys. So that is the whole thing. A service writer explained transmissions to me for 6 minutes, and it cost his company 91 refunds and a probation and every fabricated video they had. And it cost me $280 and a Saturday a month for the rest of my life. And I would sign that deal again in a heartbeat. In leggings, with a coffee stain on my hoodie, every single time. Let me leave you with the question I actually wrestle with, because I am genuinely not sure I always get it right. When you are the one person in the waiting room who can see the scam, how far do you owe it to the strangers around you to get involved? Is a quiet word to the old woman next to you enough? Or do you owe the folder, the complaint, the year of paperwork, the Saturdays? I made my choice. I would love to know yours, and I would love to hear your own version of this. The shop, the number, the thing they swore was broken. Tell me in the comments, and while you are there, drop your state and your age, because I am always curious who is out there listening, and who might be sitting in a parking lot right now with a stranger holding a pen.